You're going to really enjoy this next speaker. Burt Rutan is an entrepreneur and a designer who's famous for designing light, strong, and unusual aircraft. He designed the record-breaking Voyager, which was the first aircraft to circle the world non-stop without refueling. And he's also the designer of Spaceship One, which was the first non-government manned spaceship. He has been described by Newsweek as the man responsible for more innovations in modern aviation than any living engineer. Please help me welcome Burt Rutan.
Hi. Wow. Hello, Houston. Wow. We've got kind of a short talk. They're limiting me to 20 minutes and threatening they'll throw me off after that. So I am going to talk a little bit about innovation. Normally that's an hour-long talk, but I'm also going to talk about manned spaceflight. So here I am at the home of the Manned Spaceflight Center. That's cool. How many here, how many in the audience were born before 1935? Wait a minute. Is that all? You guys belong to a historically significant group. Do you realize that no one born after 1935 has been to the moon? Wow. That kind of hits you hard, doesn't it? We are within probably 10 or 15 years of two things happening. The most likely is that there will be no one living on the earth that's been to the moon. Or those on earth that have been to the moon speak Chinese. Now, if you had told me back when we were sending 9 people a year to the moon that I would live to see a time when no one on earth has been to the moon, I would have said, what happened? Did we kind of throw away technology? Did we go back into our caves? I'm going to talk a little bit about why that happened. I'm not going to talk about why that happened, but I'm going to talk about the negatives because that happened. We have a problem now. Yeah, we're exciting our kids, but we're exciting them with things like videos and cell phones, and not with true adventure, discovery, and exploration. We had, in the past, our great leaders were inspired as children in periods of extreme technical progress. Now, in 1908, there were only 12 people that had flown an airplane, and only 3 of them could make a turn. We didn't have the internet in 1908, but within 4 or 5 years, people that realized that, wait a minute, the guys who flew an airplane and could fly around and do multiple flights a day and make turns, they came from a bicycle shop. And there was a realization that, hey, if they can do it, I can do it. So, in just a handful of years, there were hundreds of airplane types in 39 countries. Tens of thousands of attempts to build an airplane. And the airplane was essentially invented in a very short period of time. Everything that was significant about airplanes and how they fly was invented in a very short period of time, worldwide, in a tiny amount of time. Now, in 2003, on the 100th anniversary of the Wright brothers' flight, Aviation Week magazine asked me to join others and for me to talk about the first 100 years of aerospace. Who was the movers and shakers on that? Who were the ones that really made all the difference? And I made a list, and I put these folk on the list. I was lucky enough to meet almost all of these people. I realized later that everyone on this list was a little kid during that time period when the airplanes evolved from nothing to 39 countries having hundreds of airplane types. They were inspired by that. I was inspired by aviation progress also. I did competitive things with model airplanes instead of the normal things that a kid does. And I think the main reason that I did was Wernher von Braun and Disney, Walt Disney, got together and they were on television. We didn't have television in those days. I had to drive over to an adjacent town to watch Disneyland television. And here was von Braun with models, and he's showing how we're going to send hundreds of people to Mars. Now, Mars was a real interesting place to visit then. We didn't know what kind of animals were there. We knew there were plants there. We could tell by the colors that changed in the telescopes. We didn't know whether there were humans there. Fascinating place to go, and here's this guy says, you can do it. Here's the way to do it. This was before Sputnik now. He was on Disneyland television in 1955. That made an enormous impression on me. When I was still a child of less than 15 years old, a lot of real big stuff happened. The jet age started. The missile age started. We had nuclear war. We had major advances in performance of research airplanes, military airplanes, and commercial airplanes. All happened in a very short period of time. I worked 7 years for the Air Force, flight testing Air Force airplanes during the Vietnam War. That was my first job out of college. But right after that, I was kind of forced. Inside it says, go out there and try to do something. Try to do something that you don't really necessarily know you can do. And I think I was driven because of that inspiration later. I started a business and ended up in a very short period of time doing 15 new airplane types with it, including one that flew around the world non-refueled, the Voyager. I later started another company that did not work with the public, and in a very short, over a 29-year time period, we actually developed more than 28, there's some we can't talk about, but 28 new types of airplanes. So I was able to create an environment myself. I went out and I needed help, so I hired people. I appreciated their help, so I gave them a good health care and a dental plan. And that was a cool thing. I didn't realize until after I retired a year and a half ago that one of my accomplishments was to provide jobs. I didn't even think about that when I was doing my businesses. I never thought about growing the company. But driving up to my new home in Idaho from spending 46 years in the desert, I realized that back there is 400 families. They're all fed well. They all have great health care. And every one of them pays taxes. Every one of them. That's kind of cool. A government job is a burden to the taxpayer. These guys help our government provide our freedom. This is a slide I want to spend some time on. How many here actually work for the Manned Spacecraft Center at NASA? Oh, good. Not many of you, because I'm going to try to embarrass you here. This slide's all about the 1960s. The title is the 1960s. There were 9 manned space launch systems in 8 years. Is that impossible? Well, no, it's actually true. We're looking here at Vostok, which launched Gagarin, the Redstone Mercury. This is a chronological order, by the way. The Mercury Atlas, the X-15, which flew 2 space flights, the Titan, Gemini, the Russian Soyuz, Saturn I, Saturn V, and my favorite manned launch system, the lunar module. It's kind of cool because, the number of people that are required to launch, or were required to launch a space shuttle cannot lift a space shuttle when it's fully fueled, but they can easily lift the payload. The lunar module was launched with no ground crew at all. And that is an extremely significant thing that makes that by far my favorite manned spacecraft. Now, I was an observer, not a participant of the space progress in the 60s and early 70s. I was, the NASA first 15 years were absolutely historic. America had been beaten by Russia with the early milestones of Sputnik and Gagarin, and it drove us to attempt unbelievably difficult goals. Our first astronaut, Alan Shepard, who flew a suborbital flight, followed Gagarin by only 3 weeks. After Shepard's flight, it took only 7.5 years for us to launch Apollo 8 to go out and orbit the moon. They went to the moon on the very first manned flight of the big Saturn V. Now, can you imagine today NASA developing a brand new, huge, big advanced rocket, and the first time people fly on it, they go to the moon, or they go somewhere we've never been before? That puts in perspective the kind of risks that we were taking. And those who put themselves in a position to take enormous risks are those that have breakthroughs and those that have research results. Now, Alan Shepard, we sent 27 men to the moon in less than 3.5 years, and 12 of them walked on the moon's surface. That was an enormous, important accomplishment. Alan Shepard didn't quit after his first little suborbital space flight. 10 years later, he was hitting golf balls on the moon. Within the 10 years after Alan Shepard played golf on the moon, we had multiple robotic planetary explorations. We had a Skylab space station, the first flight of the reusable space shuttle, and the promise of lower-cost space access. Surely, having a far improved way to get to the Earth orbit, we'd now be on our way to Mars or to the moons of the giant planets. What we did in the 60s, personally, not as a group and vocally, but personally, most of the people thought was impossible. The people working on it wouldn't bet their own money it would happen. 5 years after Apollo 11, the US was first in awarding science, math, and engineering doctorates. We're now number 37, I believe it is. Okay, let's move forward 42 years to what's happened since 1970. These are the new launch systems developed to fly men to space. Only 3 of them have flown. Space Shuttle, the Chinese Shenzhou, and Spaceship One. It's kind of weird that on my little team with 3 dozen helpers in a Mojave doing this covertly, we managed to get into this list of the 3 that in 42 years developed a new space. Now, I can't put that up without pointing out that there's going to be 2 more in the next few years. The SpaceX Dragon will probably fly humans soon, and Spaceship Two will probably be doing suborbital flights for the public. Just very briefly, I want to go over the Spaceship One program, just to give you an idea of what it was. First of all, it was the dream and the vision of Paul Allen, and it was all his money. The negotiation and contracting and agreement to get the entire funding for the program was based on a meeting that I had with Paul, and I says, Paul, now I think I can do this. I found a better way for re-entry, and I think I can do it. Essentially, I was telling him, if I had the money, I would spend my own money on this, which is a good ethical check, whether you're working for a billionaire or working for NASA or a NASA contract. Anyway, he reached out, he shook my hand, we had a deal, and we I don't have time to go over the program, but Spaceship One is sitting there in the Air and Space Museum now, which is in the Milestones of Flight Gallery. The reason that we didn't continue to fly it is the historian at the Smithsonian defined it as an important historical artifact. And right then, we decided not to fly it again. Except I told Paul, I said, listen, if you fly 2 more flights, you can get half your money back. So we went ahead and flew the X-Prize flights a little bit later. Just a snapshot of what's going on back at my company now. They're still working a system that can fly the public on suborbital flights. And it's about to do its first rocket testing. If this works to where the suborbital industry is extremely profitable, which we think it will be, it might lure investment, and that investment could be used for research to provide the breakthroughs so that we could get enough safety and affordability of orbital flights that we can do things like go to these kind of places for our vacation in orbit. Now, is what is going on there with Richard Branson's program, it's been criticized that, well, this is just joy rides for millionaires or billionaires, okay? Well, it could be millionaires, right? I used to be worried about that until I realized, well, wait a minute. How many here bought a Apple II computer in 1978 like I did? It wasn't the bank's computer or Lockheed's computer. It was, what was it for? Why did we get 32K and then quickly 48 and faster speed? It would run Frogger better, right? So we had a full decade of littering our homes with things that were just fun for games, really. And then, luckily, Al Gore came along and he created the internet. And we couldn't have had the internet unless we had had 10 years of filling our homes with computers, could we? So that's the way I look at this suborbital thing. Yeah, there's going to be millionaires having a lot of fun with joy rides, but I think within 10 years, somebody will figure out why we're doing it and what we can do with it. I believe that the enablers, most of the technologies that you see right now are that we say these are our latest technology. I believe most of them are just enablers to be able to do some really good stuff that can inspire our use in the future. Just a little bit of lessons learned. This is kind of a snapshot. This is Konrad Dannenberg, who came over with von Braun from Germany in 1946. And I was able to invite him down to he was propulsion guy for von Braun, to inspect our rocket motor as we did our first space flight. When we unveiled the Spaceship One, first of all, my Spaceship One program was 3.5 years. And for the first 2 years, it was covert. We were doing a manned space program in our crummy little desert town, and nobody outside knew about it. We rolled it out in April of '03, and building up to rolling it out, I says, I know somebody that has to be at the rollout. It's Max Faget. He's from Houston. Anybody here know who Max Faget is? He designed the shape of the Mercury capsule, the Gemini capsule, the Apollo capsule, a brilliant guy without an engineering degree. And I says, I'd worked with him before, some 20 years before. And I says, Max, I want you here. I want you to tell me whether this spaceship will work. And he says, Burt, God, I'm 92 now. I don't travel. And I says, Max, what do you plan to do with the rest of your life? And his daughter called me the next day, and she said, I'm bringing him. And he died just after this, before we flew to space. But it was so wonderful to have to have him there. If you involve your family in your work, it may not seem like a big deal, but I'll tell you, after you retire, it is a big deal. And it was so cool that Tanya is the only one that's ridden in the back seat of Spaceship One in flight. She was with me when we did delivering it to the museum. Okay, I've got 1 minute. I want to point out that the internet is really just the tip of a huge iceberg. We, with another 20 years or so of development here, we will have virtual reality so that it's transparent. We can't tell the resolution of not being there. Not just in sound and sight, but even the feel of a handshake. And when that happens, we'll essentially won't have to travel. I believe also that countries can be defined by people's belief, not the lat long of where they sleep. Wouldn't that be wonderful if your country allegiance had nothing to do with where you lived? And I think that's going to be possible very quick. And I want to close by saying we believe that we have humanity now. We believe and we judge it at a certain level. And we can look back just a few hundred years and we said, well, we were savages. We weren't human there. My point I want to make and leave you with is that we're not on a flat, straight line. We are continuing to accelerate up. And I believe that in a tiny, short period of time, it may be only 200 or 300 years, we will look back and realize that in 2012, we really weren't human. We hadn't really discovered real humanity yet. Thank you. Oh, there you are.
Burt, thank you very much.
I thought you were going to come the other way.
So I have a question for you. So you were inspired as a child, and then you started, when you were quite young, selling plans for home-built aircraft, right?
Yeah, my first business worked with the public.
Yeah.
Right.
Here's my question that I was wondering is, so you've been working on this for a long time. What's been the biggest change in terms, has it been the materials that you can work with, or the computational power, or the sensors? What's different about your career now?
You know, I used composite materials, not because I thought I was developing something new, but I found a way that I could build an airplane in a few months instead of a few years, and do it without tooling. So really, I stumbled into a bunch of neat composite technology, but I started out not trying to develop composite technology at all. I just had an idea for an airplane, and I wanted to fly it in 3 months, and I was able to do that. Whereas standard materials that I had built my first airplane with, it took me 4 years to build that airplane.
Has the computational power affected your life at all?
Oh, it's affected everyone, of course.
Yeah, okay. Give us your sense of what's your guess for the year that a kid will be born in space? Or on the moon or another planet?
Ooh, that's interesting. A year that a kid will be born in space.
You're going on record here.
A suborbital flight's probably too short for that. Gosh, you know, I've never thought about that. That's cool. You know, people talk about when can we go to Mars. You know, I'm starting to get doubtful that there will be people going to Mars in my lifetime. I really am. I shouldn't be, because the delta V to go one way to Mars is the same as a round trip to the moon. So, you know, back in the 60s, we could have sent someone one way to Mars. The big problem is bringing them back. I want to point out that when we traveled first and doing something much more dangerous than space research, and that was getting in covered wagons and dodging the Indians going over the Sierras to get to California, right? That was statistically much more dangerous than anything we will do in aerospace. And I want to point out also that the vast majority of people that made that trip didn't go back.
Yeah, that's right.
I was thinking that we ought to send lawyers to Mars one way. But then I realized later that that was a bad idea, because they'd lie about what they saw. How many here would, knowing that you could only live 3 more months and you'd do it on Mars, how many would volunteer to go to Mars? Okay, that's enough. You know, there's, if you think about it, ethically, the only reason to not send you guys that raised your hands is that if you spend all the money making a spaceship and you don't show up, because I don't think it's ethical to force you into the spaceship under your objection.
No.
But if you want people to go one way to Mars and know that they'll show up, you go out and find the crowd of people that think that the Mars face is real.
Great. Burt, thank you so much for the work that you do. Thanks for coming.